Okay, good morning, everybody. Good, happy Monday. Today, we're doing a little bit early, the weekly roundup. I'm going to just talk about one idea on Purim. We'll talk a little bit more about Purim in the upcoming classes with the other teachers. And then I'll do a brief synopsis of the Parsha this week. So one of my favorite ideas, which is what I'm going to share, I just like to share my favorite ideas. My favorite idea in this in the Megillah. First of all, why is it called Megillah Esther? That's a unique name. And the main thing is, every leader that we've had in the Jewish people, they never surprised us as a leader. Moshe, we expected to be great. He grew up in the palace. We knew who his parents were. Abraham, he had a lot of promise from birth. He was a super genius. If you look into the Medrash, you can talk about him. Isaac and Jacob obviously were going to be great. Look who they came from. I guess not obvious. Look at the other kids. The other kids were also great. They were unbelievable. They just used it out in the wrong way. King David, Shalom Melech, Shmuel Navi, they're buried prophets. The prophets told their parents that your kids are going to be incredible. Every leader that we had, Shlomo Melech, King Solomon came from King David, whatever. Esther is the biggest surprise. Megillah means to reveal, but almost in a way of surprise, is the biggest surprise out of any leader that we ever had. If you were to look up, if you were to psychoanalyze, let's say, Esther, give a profile about Esther from birth up until a certain episode in the Torah, up until chapter 4 of the Megillah, you would probably describe her as someone timid, scared. She was orphaned as a child. Her husband wasn't very involved. She married her first cousin, Mordechai. Mordechai was not her uncle. He was really her first cousin, but he was involved in politics. He was a very busy man. She was very reserved, fearful. She even hid from the dispatchers, obviously, that tried to take her and bring her to the king. It says clearly in the Torah that all the candidates for to be queen requested something from the king. She didn't. And the name itself, Esther, means hidden. She had a real name. Her name was Hadassah, but they changed her name. She changed her name to Esther. The whole thing is about being hidden. She never told the king her identity. That's clearly written in the Torah. And you could probably even say how she came up being orphaned, and she probably felt like she didn't deserve to ask for anything, the bottom line. And Mordechai kept saying to her, Mordechai at one point in chapter 4 said, you got to go. She ordered him to go and talk to the king on behalf of the Jewish people and tell them who you are. And she says, who am I? How can I go ahead? I'm a nobody. And Mordechai says to her something incredible. And he says to her, Leich. No. What does he say to her? Umi yodea im le'es kazais hagas lamalchus. Perhaps the whole reason, your whole life, your whole mission, everything you've gone through in your entire life was for this moment, was to be in this position. And it said that she listened to everything that Mordechai ever told her. And when he gave her this sense of mission, this, like a mission statement, perhaps this is the entire purpose of your entire life. You're working up until this point to be in this position to defend the Jewish people. What does she say right after that? She replies, go and assemble all the Jews who are present in Shushan, fast on my behalf. They shouldn't eat or drink for 3 days. My maidens, they're going to fast as well. And I'm going to go to the king contrary to law, right? You were not allowed to, she wasn't allowed to approach the king unless the king called you. And in fact, you would be put to death if you approached the king without being called. And she had been called in months. And she says, Kasher avadati, avadati. And if I die, let me die. She completely reinvented herself at that moment. When he told her, this is your mission in life. says that she completely reinvented herself. It says there were the story of three pilots. Was it three pilots? Three pilots that went to go blow up the Iraqi nuclear reactor in the 1980s while Reagan was president. Right? The Iraqis were very clear that they were they were trying to create nuclear weapons, essentially. And they had a nuclear reactor with the assistance of France. And the Israelis kept asking the Americans, please do something to help stop it. And they said, no, and we don't want you to react. We don't want to, whatever. And the Israelis went ahead and they did it. They went ahead and they blew it up and they made it back safely. Now, when they went ahead and when they interviewed the pilots, they asked them, what were you feeling going up to the, what were you feeling on your way there? They said, well, let's paint you a picture. We only had enough fuel to make it there and not to make it back. And what we expected, meaning we were only had enough fuel. We had to fly very low. Planes, I don't know aeronautics, but planes fly very low in order to, it's much more efficient with gas. And so they wanted to fly very low so they would be under the radar. They had to fly over, what do they have to fly over? They had to fly over Jordan, I think what parts of Saudi Arabia. I don't know the whole geographical area. Very hostile areas. And so we only had enough fuel to get there and maybe like halfway on the way back. That's what we planned for. We thought maybe, well, we would get picked up right away once we dropped the bombs. If we even hit it, we thought one of us had a chance of hitting the reactor, not three, which it ultimately was. All three hit perfectly. And they made it back and they thought for sure we're going to get tailed and shot down and taken as prisoner. And we had cyanide pills and we'd kill ourselves. And that was going to be the end of it. They made it and said there was a certain sense of calm. Actually, I didn't feel fearful. I didn't feel scared. I knew that this was my life's mission, and it gave me a sense of calm, and I was able to carry out things with precision. And the miracle was when we turned around, there was still no there was no reaction yet from the Iraqis. They were so caught off guard that we even got excited. We're like, there might even be a chance for us to make it back, which they ultimately did. It was like a miracle. There was enough fuel to make it all the way back. But we see that when a person's filled with a sense of mission, it permeates every part of their life. When we're very clear about our mission, and it gives you the ability to reinvent yourself at any point in time. It's very clear. It's very important to have a sense of mission, to feel what your sense of mission is. That's what the Tanya obviously tries to tell you. We haven't really gotten into it yet, although in chapter 2 we will talk about it, certainly. And then in this, if you do the daily Tanya, it's really going into detail. Chapter 36, 35, 34, 35, 36 talks about the purpose of creation, what your mission is. You might think your job is, cutting cloth, but that's just Hashem has just brought you to that place in order to have an influence in your surrounding. So it's a very powerful moment. That's what's unique about Esther. That's why it's called Megillas Esther, the surprise of Esther, the revelation of the hidden. She surprised us. She reinvented herself, and that's why another reason why there's such an immense joy. It's so relatable. This story. It's a miracle that happened within exile, within darkness, and the darkness even continued. But we see that God's hand was behind. It's even within the exile, God's hand is still there. Don't think God has abandoned us. That's what the Jewish people thought. God abandoned us. We're part of King Achashverosh now. We're under we've made it into high society. It's not true. God is still there, just hides himself. And but enough already. We're ready for the revelation. Okay, that's just a quick little idea on Purim that I think about. I live with. If there's one thing I think about during Purim, that's the one thing I think about during Purim. Moving on to the Parsha. If you have any questions, just stop me. Moving on to the Parsha. It's Parsha Tzav. It's usually read right before Pesach. This is usually the Parsha read right before Passover, but because it's a leap year, We got exactly 1 month from Purim until Passover. So last week we began about the Ola sacrifice. The Ola sacrifice was a unique sacrifice that was completely burnt on the altar. But the laws of the Ola weren't really discussed at length. It's actually mainly discussed in this week's Parsha. It says, this is the law of the Ola. It stays on the altar the whole night. And it says that the altar should always be burning. There was the altar called the Mizbeach, was 18 feet high, and it was had the Maracha, which was a pile of wood piled up that kept that had to be burned, constantly be burning. And what it says is there are whatever wasn't consumed, whichever sacrifice wasn't consumed during the day, could be left over and consumed at night. And that's why we have the Mariv prayer, right? We know all three prayers correspond to the 3 times of davening during the day, 3 times of prayer, the Shachris, the Mincha, the afternoon, and the Mariv. So where does Mariv come from? There's no mitzvah to bring up sacrifices at night. No, but whatever was left over, you can continue to burn it into the night. And because of that, we have the Mariv prayer, which is rabbinic. It's a rabbinic prayer, which we spoke about many times. There's some whenever there's something rabbinic, they always made loopholes to let you know that it's rabbinic. So if you miss certain things like mentioning Rosh Chodesh during the Mariv prayer, normally that would be a problem. You'd have to go back and say the whole Amidah once again. But at Mariv, we don't go back and say it. Okay. Now there's a very interesting mitzvah. If you look when you open up the Parsha, in verse 3, it talks about the Trumas Hadeshin, which God calls beautiful. What is the Trumas Hadeshin? The Trumas Hadeshin was the ashes that were left over from the burning. It's very interesting. There was half of the ashes. I mean, you can imagine how many animals were sacrificed upon this thing. I mean, hundreds of animals. Every individual could bring something. Nations of the world brought something. Thousands of animals were slaughtered on this thing. So it had a lot of ashes left over. Half of the ashes would be raked off, and the other half would pile up high for years. And that was called a tapuach. Tapuach literally means apple. But it was a mound. It was a mound, and they make the mound in the shape of an apple. And God called that beautiful. But you had to make room for more sacrifices. So they would rake off half of the ashes every day. It was called Trumas Hadeshin. And it was a big mitzvah. To be able to do it, you only got one chance. If you were a Kohen, you were able to do it once in your lifetime. Like a lot of things, you're only able to do it once in your lifetime. And he would put on his special big day kahuna. Big day means garments. Kahuna means of a Kohen. He would wear his special garments, despite the fact that he was going to get all ashy. He was going to get all dirty. It was a holy part. And he would rake off half with a special rake, a metal rake, and it would just go to the floor. It would go to an area right next to the Mizbeach, right next to the altar. It would fall on the floor. And it was a miracle that the ashes would dissipate into the ground. The ground was made out of it was stone, but they would disappear within the ground. He had to walk up about 18 feet high, walk up the ramp, right? It's a ramp going up to the Mizbeach, up to the altar, not steps, because God says, I don't want like a Marilyn Monroe thing going on where the skirt, we wore like these long skirts, kind of like what the Muslims wear. These long coats, and you don't want anything flying up. So they would go up the ramp, and they would put it down. So the Tzvas Emes, they would rake it down. The Tzvas Emes, who is the second Ger Rebbe, a very holy man buried in Eretz Yisrael, in Jerusalem, I believe. So he says a very interesting idea. He says a very nice thought. He says the Zohar says that the Ola was an atonement for one, like we spoke about last week. It was an atonement for a few things, and one of them is allowing your mind to wander. Now, is there a sin of something negative coming to your mind, or a sinful thought coming to your mind? No, there's no sin in that. That's how we're designed. And that's clearly in Tanya. Not just in Tanya, that's in Halacha, in the Gemara. The problem is dwelling upon it. So we said, if a person dwells upon negative thoughts, they're going to have to bring even worrisome thoughts, says the Zohar, even worrisome thoughts. Because a person who's a natural worrier, that's a problem. That shows that you lack emunah, you lack faith. And that is clearly a problem. So we try not to hang around people who are worriers. We try to have influence on them. But if you're a worrier, let's talk. So that's, so you had you would bring one of the sacrifices if you were a person who strayed after their thoughts too much. So the fire represents, according to the Zohar, the desire for God. Yeah, you have a fiery desire for something. You lust after something. You love something so much. It brings a certain fire. That's a fire of God. And what happens is and the animal represents the desire itself. Something animalistic, blood, warmth, materialism, physicality. When we inflame that desire, God says, reach nechayach, that is so pleasurable. And you take those ashes, and I want you to put those ashes next to the Mizbeach. Even those ashes that's left, it's not, I don't want you just to consume the whole thing. Every aspect of this whole process is beautiful to me. That even the ashes itself, I want them laid next to the Mizbeach, something very holy. That we might think, our past experiences, our past desires, you want to completely banish them. Negative desires, negative experience. And it's true. You don't want to lust after them. You want to burn them up, but you want to use them out for godliness. Don't just dispel your past. Don't just say, I reinvented myself and therefore I'm a whole new person. And therefore my entire past is nothing to me. I am, you don't have to be defined by it, but you could use it out for a godly purpose. A person who's gone through trauma, God forbid, or certain types of trauma, it's not enough isn't necessary just to forget everything. But what about, God says the tools that you use to get through it, or you continue to use to get through it, use it out for somebody else. Now, some people take that to it like, a little bit, I think it's misused or misplaced or whatever the correct term is. They decide to, they think they're, they read a couple self-help books and then therefore they're able to they feel like they can help everybody. And then they assume everybody's got trauma and everybody's got this, which is not necessarily, it's not true. Now, some people everybody's got a little bit of trauma in their life for even a good reason. And that's rooted in the Tzimtzum. If you want to know, there's a great trauma in creation. And that's why trauma exists in this world. There was the great Tzimtzum. Yeah, there was a tremendous revelation of godliness, the way God was. And then there was a Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is a contraction. God hid his light, and that left an effect upon the world. And then God, slowly reintroduced himself after the Tzimtzum. It's called La'achar Tzimtzum, after the contraction. But that effect that Tzimtzum had created a certain, there's a trauma always going on. There's like a certain trauma. And so our traumas are rooted in that trauma. It also played itself out when Cain killed Hevel. There was a certain trauma there, and everybody's got trauma. Yaakov has trauma. Yitzchak had less trauma. That's why he had less problems in his life. Yosef had tremendous trauma. The families were highly dysfunctional. Getting a little bit off topic, but nevertheless, I always say to people, they're like, "Oh, Rabbi, I ate like some non-kosher food. I ate a lot of non-kosher food." Well, for those of you who don't know, I did not grow up observant until I was about 18, 19. So I said, look, for 18 years of my life, I ate cheeseburgers, and look how I turned out. Very pretty religious, I would say. So it's not. Don't worry. Don't worry. It's all part of your journey. It's true, but I'm joking. But it's true. So says the Sfas Emes, God wants, make sure, don't just throw everything away. Use it out. Everything has a godly purpose, and use it out. Now, we're removing the large heap, the tapuach, right? The other half. So every few years, they'd have to remove the huge heap a huge heap of ashes that would just remain there. So for that, the Torah says he must change into his regular work clothes. Put on his, what's that company? Carhartt. Put on your Carhartts and carry it out, because they would carry it out past the camp. They would carry it outside of the courtyard, outside where people lived. into a holy place, a pure, not a holy place, but a pure place. It had to be buried in a pure place. But because you're going back into the outside world, you need clean clothing. It's not so beautiful. What dirty clothing, ashy clothing looks beautiful in the holy temple, but going into the outside world, your clothes have to be clean. Very practical halacha in the Torah over here. So he would put back on his regular Carhartt overalls and carry them.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, as I understand it, the Kohen is not allowed to leave the Bet HaMikdash, or I guess the Mishkan in this case, with the priestly garments. So would these particular garments count as priestly garments, or
no? Great question. Yeah,
okay.
His regular clothing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he put back on his regular clothing. Good question.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, his Carhartt. You know Carhartt? I don't know. Maybe that's just here. You know what I'm talking about, Carhartt? That's like the construction clothing. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, he would. I guess that could be misunderstood. That maybe.
No, I got you. I know it.
Yeah.
I know what Carhartt was, but I didn't know if this counted as part of his whole thing. Because you mentioned he's going to another place which is pure, so it's pure. I don't know, a loophole or whatever. Yes,
good question. Yeah, so that's why I didn't say holy. I tried to correct myself. Not holy, but pure. A mikvah is pure. The ocean is pure. There are certain places that you can keep pure, meaning no dead bodies. We keep away shrotzim, which are insect, creepy crawly creatures, whatever, little insects, little bugs. It has to remain pure, but not necessarily. A Kohen's house was pure. Even though he could live next door to me, even though I'm not a Kohen. In fact, my neighbor is a Kohen. But he has to keep his house as pure as possible, actually, even till today. It's pure within a certain, he can't go to visit a dead, he can't go to a cemetery. Anyway, back in the day, he would have a mikveh in his own house to keep the house very pure and everything like that. It's a great question. Okay, so Rashi explains that the flame of the menorah was lit from the fire on top of the altar. It's called the Mizbeach HaNechoshes, the outside altar. Nechoshes means the copper altar, which is the main altar. It was an inside altar. Mizbeach HaZahav, the golden altar, which was, like we explained a few parshas ago, which is where the Ketoras, the incense, was burned. And then on the outside altar was copper, Mizbeach HaNechoshes, that's considered the outside altar. The Alter Rebbe said, our Rebbe gives a very nice idea. Why did the menorah have to be lit from the Mizbeach HaNechoshes, the outside altar? The menorah, the light of the menorah, according to the Zohar, represents the light of Torah. It's the love and the light of Torah. If you want to capture the divinity of Torah, truly capture the divinity of Torah, you need to take the outside and bring it in, and vice versa. In other words, you need to be involved in the world. You need to take the light of the menorah, bring it outside, and also within the outside, bring it in to be elevated. That's the only way you're going to capture the divinity of Torah. And it makes sense because the whole point is not just to learn Torah, just to learn Torah. The whole Torah is to have an effect upon the world, elevate the world, get involved in the world. So it's a very important mitzvah, a very important halacha to keep in mind. Just to mention something a little bit unrelated, the animal was shechted, slaughtered, on the northern side of the courtyard. North, south, east, and west. Yeah, those are the four directions. So the north represents what's called tzafon. Tzafon literally means to be hidden. We have what's called the afikomen, right? We have afikomen on Pesach. Another word for it, and what it's called inside the Haggadah, it's called a tzafon, which means hidden, because we hide it away for the entire Seder, and then we eat it at the very end. We take a little piece of the afikomen, a little piece of the matzah, we hide it in a napkin or something, or some people hide it and they try to go find it, like they hide it in couches or whatever. We just have to cover it up so you don't eat it. But it's hidden. It's called tzafon, to be hidden. And why is it called hidden? If you move, if you move north, the more north we go, the Torah says, and we see it clearly, it becomes more frigid, more cold, which means an insensitivity to godliness, a covering over of godliness, a concealment. So that's called hidden. As opposed to Dorum, which is south, South is where it's warm. There's passion for Hashem. It says that Avram traveled south in the Torah. Why does it say Avram traveled south? It says the Zohar, it means that he had a passion, and passion for Hashem, a passion for godliness, and he became closer and closer to Hashem. There is the Chata sacrifice that was taking place in the northern side. Now there are three. That was a serious sin done unintentionally. Now I just want to speak a little bit about something very interesting. There are three different types of three categories of acts. There's accidental, which we call onus. Then you have unintentional, which is called shogeg. And when you do something intentional, God forbid, it's called mazid. Now, what's the difference between accidental and unintentional? Onus and shogeg. Well, onus is like basically, what if you're outside and you're doing target practice, and somebody pushes you, and you kill someone's bird. So you're not really held liable for that. You didn't expect whatever. That's somebody pushed you. It was against your will. Onus means I know I said it means accidental, but it's also like you were forced kind of to do it. You had nobody expected you to do such a thing, act in such a way. As opposed to accidental, which is shogeg. I mean, unintentional. If you were just doing target practice and then you by actually shot a bird, you're held liable for that. You have to pay some sort of penalty for that, because you should have been more careful. Now you won't be thrown in prison necessarily, hopefully, but it's a problem nevertheless. But it's not such a great problem as opposed to mazid. Mazid means intentional, and we're talking about really intentional in terms of someone getting killed in the Torah. Almost hardly ever happened. In fact, it said if a bezdin would put someone to death once every 70 years, it was considered a harsh bezdin. I don't know how many people we put to death in Texas and in Florida. Well, I think we put away a lot. We don't blink an eye. But in order to get killed, in order to be put to death in the Torah, the way the Torah talks about it, it's almost impossible. You have to, the person in the middle of their act, or when they're about to do it, they have to know that there are consequences to their action, that there has to be two witnesses, and the two witnesses have to scream to this guy, if you do that, you are liable to have lead put down your throat. It's one of the ways that they would kill you. Not you, but the way they kill one person. And he has to say, yes, fine. And they have to tell him again. And then he has to go through. I mean, like, he's got to be really, really intentional over here. Now, that's true. That hardly ever happened. But the Bezdin did have the authority, if they felt someone was a danger to society, truly a danger to society, they were allowed to take him off the street, and they were allowed to put him in a jail. If somebody, let's say like this, the Gemara gives an example of, let's say you see somebody running, chasing somebody. I think we spoke about this in the past. Let's say they saw someone chasing someone with a knife in their hand, and the person runs into a cave. So they're chasing after somebody. Shmuel is chasing after Ruvain, and Ruvain is screaming his head off, and he runs into the cave, and Shmuel comes after him with a knife, holding his knife in his hand, and he comes back out of the cave with blood dripping from the knife. Now, according to the Torah, Shmuel is not put to death. He didn't do anything. He wasn't warned. He didn't go through the process. So he's not put, you can't be put to death because of that, according to the Torah. But you walk inside the cave, and you see there was no other place to go. There's no other way anybody else could have came in there. All the evidence is clear that Shmuel definitely killed Ruvain. So the Bezdin did have the authority to arrest Shmuel, and one of the ways they would deal with him was they would feed him. I don't exactly know what they would feed him. They feed him something where his stomach would explode, right? Yeah, his stomach would explode. Whatever, something that he would be killed. So the Bezdin did have authority to do such a thing. So don't think we didn't. There was no justice. There was certainly justice when justice needed to be carried out.
Rabbi, how is that different from actually exacting the death penalty?
Well, it's not. We don't do it the way the Torah tells us to do it. You know. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of spiritual significance to this. Listen, the death penalty in the Torah is a kapara. It's called the kapara. It's a form of atonement. It's the way that the soul becomes atoned. You ever seen the movie Caddyshack? Not saying I saw it, but I did.
Yes.
Yes. The Judge Smalls, has Danny sit down, and whatever, he has this guy sit down, and Judge Smalls was a very egotistical, very mean guy, and he says, Danny's like 17 years old, and he said, Danny, I put many boys your age into the electric chair. I didn't want to do it, but I felt I owed it to them. Whatever. He's like an evil guy, he's like a funny, he's a terrible man. But in a certain way, that's what the Torah is doing. The Torah is, in order for you to go back into the right place in Shemayim, have your soul return back to where it needs to go, it needs to have kapara, and this is a way to give kapara, as opposed to the way the Beis Din did it. The person was a dangerous society. We had to end his life. It's not a kapara necessarily. It's just there's no other option. There would be no justice in the world. People would live in fear. That's why one of the 7 laws is to set up court systems, because people will live in fear. It doesn't necessarily have to be so harsh. Like I think nowadays, the Torah, the world, the way American law is way more harsh and unforgiving than even Torah law for sure. I mean, if you steal something, you just have to give it back. Here, you can go to jail. You get 3 strikes. I mean, there's lots of terrible things. People get killed from circumstantial evidence all the time. Now, in the Beis Din, they didn't necessarily do it that way. They weren't always killed. In fact, that's the point. When the Torah says, when the Talmud says that a person was only killed once every 70 years, it's talking about it can be considered if a Beis Din killed somebody once every 70 years, it's talking about that situation where Shmuel goes after Reuven. It was all circumstantial evidence, and they killed somebody. They hardly ever put somebody to death. But just to answer your question once again, it was a form of kapara.
That's a great analogy, by the way, the Caddyshack analogy. Of
course, that's me using out my ashes, putting them next to the Mizbeach. Yeah. I just
Shikoyak, Rabbi Shikoyak. That was a great
You're
one.
welcome. Thank you, everybody. Now go and watch the movie. No, don't. You don't have to. Okay. We learned a little bit about koshering over here. There's something called, this is very important. There are certain foods there's certain carbonates that have to be consumed within a certain period of time. So they either have to be completely consumed in 1 day or 2 days or 3 days. They certainly have to be eaten within 3 days. Now, if they are not consumed or eaten within that period of time, as prescribed by the Torah, it's called nosar, which literally means notar, which literally means left over, and it becomes treif. It's like milk. It's like a cheeseburger with bacon on top. It's a big problem. It's just as unkosher as anything else. And the Torah says, what if nosar was put into a vessel? What you should do is, says the Torah, you should boil water in that vessel, and it will purge it of its taste, of its flavor. And this is where we learn about koshering. How do we kosher certain things? And the Torah says it depends if it was in a metal. If it was in a metal vessel, you can put boiling water in it. If it was in an earthenware vessel, it has to be broken. And that's why we know China, like earthenware, China, cannot really be koshered. It's very, very challenging to kosher it. The rabbis, the sages were very careful with people's money, and they understood that certain items are very expensive, and so they did give possible ways of koshering it. But lichatchila, as a go-to on the like the first initial preference is to not kosher them, and you have to break them. You can sell them, you can make a profit off of them, but you cannot kosher them for the most part. Now, you may be able to put it in a kiln once again. I don't know any other translation for those of you who speak Spanish and Portuguese, but a kiln, yeah, you can paint it once again and put it into a kiln, perhaps, and that's a way of koshering it because it gets up to about 2,000 degrees. But nevertheless, we learned about koshering over here, about metal vessels. That's one of the ways. So however it became, the general rule is however it became kosher is how unkosher is how it becomes kosher. So here, these animals became kosher through fire. They became unkosher through fire. Yeah, they were heated up from fire. So the way to purge it is through fire once again, which we'll talk about it maybe at a different time. The question, a modern day question is, what about plastic? What's the status of plastic? Plastic didn't exist back in the day. So for the most part, it's a machlokes. It's a disagreement. Some say you can kosher plastic. Some say you can't. The rabbi will usually just ask us, if I ever need to do plastic, he'll say no. And I'll be like, look, I really need it. And I think he's like, all right, fine, you can. It's usually how it goes, if you guys really want to know the truth. These are questions to ask a Rav. For the most part, when you need something paskind. Now, you can come to me and almost any rabbi, if they have the title rabbi, and say, this thing fell into my pot. How do I make the pot kosher? Can I eat the food? Is the food kosher? Et cetera, et cetera. We can answer that. When it comes to more complicated halachot, like this situation where there's a machlokes, where there's a disagreement among modern day halachic authorities, you need a Rav, someone who is a halachic authority who can pass laws, pass judgment, and is accepted by many people. He can't just come and say, oh, I'm a halachic authority. It's accepted by a group. Usually they're on a bezdin, so there's very few of them. Rabbi Elimelech is one of them. So a lot of times I'll say I have to ask Rabbi Elimelech. Sometimes you guys ask me questions and I'll be like, I actually have to ask a Rav this because I know it's a very complicated question and there's a lot of different opinions and I'm not sure how he would hold in this case. Chapter 7 gets into what's called an asham offering, which had intentional sins. Asham literally means to be guilty. Chatas means chet. A chet usually means a sin, right? We say chet eitz hadas, the sin of the tree of knowledge. That's actually a mistranslation. Chet literally means to go down, which going down we usually will assume is something negative, or it has like a stigmatism to it. It's negative. You went down. But anybody who learns Chassidus knows that going down is good because that means you're fulfilling your mission. We're trying to go down to the lowest world. We know that all downs come back up. So the Chet Hadas wasn't exactly a sin necessarily. It really wasn't a sin. It was a Yerida. It was a descent. Now, all descents usually stink. I mean, who wants to have a descent? The stock market, it goes down. Nobody's necessarily very excited. However, those that are seasoned know there's an opportunity there to invest more because it'll probably shoot back up very fast and very hard. And it's great. You just have to wait for it. It'll come. So it's a great parable in life. So the chatas literally means a downward offering, an offering of when you do something unintentional, not necessarily bad. No, it just doesn't feel good at the time. We get into the Toda offering, talks about the Toda. Toda means thank you. The Toda offering, Thanksgiving offering, there are 4 times, says the Torah, that we give a Thanksgiving. We give a Thanksgiving offering if you travel across the sea, because certainly going across the sea was dangerous back then. Traveling even by plane. Nowadays, that's what we would do. Now, you might say it's the safest way to travel. It's true. I don't know about you, but when the turbulence gets a little intense, I get a little nervous. It's like, when the plane goes down, it's done. Okay, it doesn't go down often, but still, in the back of my mind, I know. So you cross over the ocean. Anytime you cross over the ocean, you would bring a Toda offering. Going across the desert, you bring a Toda offering. Coming out of jail or prison, and coming over a serious illness or a brush with death, you would bring a Toda offering. Nowadays, we don't bring a Toda offering. Hopefully we will, God willing, when Mashiach comes today. But we bench the Gomel. We give we say a certain blessing. And that's exactly what we do today. Now, the Toda offering was extremely expensive. You had to bring 40 loaves of bread together with the animal was no. I'm not sure people were really looking forward to giving the offering. A lot of money. Bringing carbonis, being a Jew, it's expensive. It's expensive if you live in. It's an expensive lifestyle. But we know our parnasa comes from Hashem, and that's why the talking about sacrifices and these types of things, they're called sacrifices because you really give up a lot to show our appreciation towards God, and knowing that everything really comes from God, and it really changes your life. I mean, you really live on a different plane when you live that way. We also have something called the Tfilas HaDerech, a certain prayer that we say when we travel. According to most opinions, if you travel 72 minutes away from your home, you'll say the Tfilas HaDerech prayer, which is on page, I think, 86 or 87 in the Blue Sitter. If you're on an airplane, you say it on the runway, if you want to know. That's most opinions. And the Torah continues with the 7-day inauguration of the tabernacle, which will really be spoken about in Parshas Shmini, which is coming up. But I think that's about all the time I wanted to allot today. Anybody have any questions? That means you weren't paying attention. Just kidding. Caddyshack. Okay. Thanks, Rivka. Yeah, Caddyshack is great. Okay. If you have no questions, I will. There will not be class tonight. Once again, class tomorrow, picking back up with Rabbi chapter 2 with Rabbi Weinberg, and I wish you all a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Go ahead.
All right, guys.
Oh yeah.
Thank you,
Oh, yeah.
Rabbi.
Good crowd. Good guys. Okay, this is my crew. I like this crew. Okay.
That's right. All right, Baruch Hashem. Bye.
Okay. See you guys.